Welcome to Chapter 2 of the course Guidelines for Dashboard Conceptualization. This lesson discusses the challenges in data representation. When we think of data visualization, there are two key challenges to achieve a good representation. The first thing that we must analyze is the medium that best delivers the story. The medium may be a printed medium, a publication, a PowerPoint presentation like this one, something that we will project, as in the case of dashboards, because most of the times we will have a projected presentation of our data. This will impact on the use of color, shapes, sizes, on the distance between the audience and what we are projecting. Therefore, all these aspects must be taken into consideration. And the other essential condition is that we must design the visual components that best help us to tell the story clearly. If we remember what we saw in Lesson 1 about Stephen Few's principles, that need of clarity is essential because we want the eyes to do the work instead of the mind. When we think of visualizations, the first thing that we have to consider when looking at our set of data is what is the best way that our message fits the visualization that we are using. So for example, with these two graphs, one of them shows data of domestic sales and the other of international sales. In the case of domestic sales, there seems to be an increase in sales, at least in terms of the amount. And international sales also appear to be growing. That may be true or not. With this kind of graph, it is even hard to easily tell which represents our highest levels of sales. And so, we should find a second kind of visualization which helps us make those elements more evident. And there is something very simple. We have a timeline on which international sales that are higher are represented, and we have domestic sales that are going down. Up here, since the data were given in gross amounts, it was not easy to understand that actually, on a percentage basis, sales were going down, which is obvious when we look at the tendency in the timeline. Domestic sales seem to grow, but when we look at them on a percentage basis, there has not been a difference in terms of percentage of sales, especially in the last 4 years. Then we must always think how to enhance clarity when we try to communicate something. When we see this graph that appears on the screen, we think that it's very attractive. It is a graph with nice colors, interesting shapes, but our brain has to start working immediately and must begin to figure out what it represents. In this graph, we see what the 3 candidates evaluated for a job are like, and that they have been evaluated in 6 different aspects. Now, at the center of the graph, we have 0, and it goes up on the way out. The graph tells us how well a candidate was evaluated in a specific aspect. For example, we can see that this one has the highest score in communication, but immediately the brain has to start relating this communication with this figure. It has to go down here and try to identify which of the 3 candidates it was all about. And so we wonder, is there an easier way to see this data without having our brain work so much? And it turns out that what we probably least expected is the most evident way. In this case, we have the evaluation of a candidate, and we can see his aspects easily. And even in this table, we can see what the final percentage of his score is. We can see, for instance, that one of them got the highest score, which was not so obvious in this one, where we had to interpret the shapes. On the other hand, if we want to see who got the highest score in one aspect, we can easily see that this candidate got the highest score, and that this one has some low scores, which perhaps are not so obvious when we see the graph on the left. And this leads us to think that the use of tables is not prohibited in visualizations. Moreover, there is a context in which tables should be used. They are useful and easily convey data, maybe in a way better than a graph, like the one we saw above, or any other kind of bar, line, graph, whatever, would not be possible to reach in a certain level of detail that may be necessary in some cases. Again, the set of data that we are analyzing is what gives us hints on where we have to focus when we define a visualization element. And maybe it is difficult to get the exact value in a graph like the one we had here, even in this one. It is difficult to know whether it's a 1, maybe a 2, a 3, or a 2.5. That precision is not possible on the graph as it is here in the table, where we can see the actual data. Let's take this one. We see 144.4, in which that 0.4 may be very important to interpret that information, and that data may not be totally visible in another kind of representation. So tables are very useful when we want to compare individual values, when data must be precise, even with decimals, or when multiple units of measurement must be analyzed. For example, if we are looking for the data of July 1996, it is easier than trying to locate it in a time series, for example. Another important issue in visualizations is to find how graphs show relationships between data, since they provide certain shape to data. When we see these two time series, we see that there is a shape in this set of data that is not evident in a table like the one we saw before. In this case, we do easily see, without the need of our brain starting to work, that we have managed to increase domestic sales through all the months of a same year, while we see that international sales represent a much lower volume of sales compared to the domestic ones, and that international sales have remained stable. There is a slight decrease in August, but it has remained in the same level throughout the whole year. Finally, we should see that data can give us hints, a clue, can help us find an answer, as long as they are represented appropriately. In the graph we see now on the screen, we are evaluating people's level of job satisfaction related to their education and salary. And so we see on the left of the graph that people under 50 years old have certain level of satisfaction that increases according to their level of education, while on the right there are people who are 50 or over. So, to interpret what the relationship between age, education, and level of satisfaction is, again the brain must start making a series of comparisons and visualizations, and on one hand, that involves more work, but most of all, we run the risk that the brain fails to interpret the elements correctly and does not reach the conclusion that we wanted to reach. While if we make a much simpler graph, as the one we see here on the right side, we see that there is a very strong relationship of satisfaction among those who have a college degree and earn more than $50,000 than those who are fairly satisfied but do not have a college degree and earn less than $50,000. When they reach their most mature age, their satisfaction will have decreased dramatically. This, that is quite evident here, requires much interpretation on the left side. And so, what we must enhance in our visualizations is this simplicity that allows everybody to reach the same answer as easily and with the same level of accuracy. In short, so far, we have seen the importance of adjusting the visualization to the message we want to communicate. Also, we must try to always enhance clarity so there are not wrong interpretations of what data really represent. Something that might not have seemed obvious when we talked about visualizations is that we must not be afraid of using tables. What is certain is that they must be used in the appropriate context, when precision is needed above all. We must never try to distort the story, because if we change it, if we distort it, if we represent it in a malicious or wrong way, the story is not delivered and the decision made based on those data will not be the right one. And then, always seek the best visualization for the dataset that we're looking at. This concludes Lesson 2, and we hope to see you in Lesson 3.